Hello. So I wanted to record a short video just to talk to you a little bit about the creator selections. I did grade those and provided feedback where I thought it was necessary. If you didn't get any feedback, that's okay, other than the rubric. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was on the right track. No feedback means that you're good, you're heading in the right direction. Feedback from me doesn't mean anything bad. It just means that I needed to maybe address a few things. So holistically, then I wanted to just leave a comment to everyone because I think everybody for the most part chose song lyrics except for one or two people, and that's okay. I just wanted to address that if you chose song lyrics, a lot of you chose multiple songs, like 3 songs, and that's perfectly acceptable. I just want to I want to make everybody aware as you move forward that the main goal for this is to have 3 to 5 key terms, okay? So it's good if you have 3 songs, just know that you may not need all 3. If you're someone that chose only 1 song, that's perfectly fine too. Just know that you might need another song or 2 if you don't get enough key terms out of the 1 song that you chose. So just be aware of that. This is a process. It will change and grow as you begin to analyze. Some people ask me from time to time if it's okay to change their topic. You can always change your topic at any time before the final paper is due. The final draft of this paper is due. So, it's something that will grow and adapt as you grow and adapt with the assignment. Now, that said, I wanted to give everybody just a few ideas on what I'm looking for with the key terms analysis that's due this Sunday. So like I said, you need 3 to 5 key terms for this paper. I would much prefer 3 really strong, well fleshed out paragraphs on 3 key terms than 5 to 10 short paragraphs on just random key terms, okay? So the number of key terms you have doesn't matter, other than as long as you meet the minimum. Having 3 is a perfect amount for this paper, so just keep that in mind. It's more manageable. Now, that said, the goal of this section is not to dive into a full discussion of the term itself, right? So if we're doing Taylor Swift and your key term is love from Love Story, this section of the paper is really not to dive deep into what that term means about Taylor Swift's worldview. The goal for the key terms section is simply to describe the cluster terms that cluster around the key term and use those terms to develop a definition of the key term, okay? So a lot of this section is going to be very functional and practical, and it's going to be a little tedious and boring to write out, because essentially what you need to do is list the key term, then explain why it's a key term, then list all of the cluster terms, and then explain the cluster terms. And by the end, you should have a definition for the key term. So I want to show you what I mean by that. So this is the assignment that's due on Sunday. Definitely make sure you rewatch this video as needed. This section here is really the meat of what you need to do before you write this part of the paper. And then I have really specific instructions that you should definitely follow. I'm going to evaluate your submission based on this. Although this is a section of the paper, I want this to be as completed of a draft as possible, because we need to get this out of the way so we can actually get to the meat of the essay. So just make sure you read through these instructions. It very carefully explains what I'm looking for here. And then I just want to talk quickly about these 2 examples. So if you notice right off the bat, they both start with the key term in bold. And whenever you use the key term, then you should bold it as well, because this will help the reader know that you're not just using the word poverty, let's say, you're actually specifically talking about that key term. Then the next thing they do is tell me why this is a key term. The theme of poverty is emphasized throughout the song to deliver its purpose. Haunted, the main word used in Swift's song Haunted, which debuted in 2010, describes how she feels after a significant other left her. So they're describing the significance, the importance of each of these terms and why they were selected as key terms or ideas, okay? Then the next thing that they do, and this is where it gets kind of boring, they list all of the cluster terms, right? So this is why it's important to write your cluster terms out physically and then group them physically as well, because you need to have that done before you actually write this section. And so they just list out the cluster terms that they found, right, in italics. So just like the key term, the cluster terms need a special formatting. We italicize these. So anytime you use those words, anytime you use them, they should be italicized in the essay. This will help separate the grammar to let the reader, me in this case, but any reader that would read this, know that you're not using this word grammatically with your sentence. You're using this word as sort of a subject of the sentence, right? Or an object of the sentence. So it will affect the way that the grammar of the sentence is read. So please make sure that you format those correctly every time. Key terms in bold, cluster terms in italics. And then the next thing that they do is they group or describe the key terms. So again, this section, although it's called the key terms analysis, a bulk of what you're doing is actually analyzing the cluster terms, because analyzing the cluster terms helps us provide a definition for the key term, right? It tells us a little bit more about what the key term means to this creator. So let me just read a little bit of this. So the cluster terms here, kids in the street, no home, broken heart, yada, yada, yada. These terms are all negative, so they're grouping them as negative terms because they relate to the word poverty, to its circumstances and what defines poverty. The phrase kids in the street, so this should be italicized. I didn't do that. Bad, Mr. Wynkoop. Let me, so this is what you would need to do. The phrase kids in the street emphasizes that poverty affects people of all ages. So here, they're analyzing kids in the street. It emphasizes that poverty affects people of all ages, and that even kids in the street, have to face these hardships. The phrase not enough to eat relates to what those in poverty lack because of their situation. This is also seen in the cluster phrases no home and not a nickel to loan, which both show that since those who live in poverty lack the essentials to themselves, they are unable to give to others as a result. So they're relating this back to poverty, but the main idea is they're trying to describe and analyze these cluster terms in relation to poverty. So it's giving us an idea of what poverty means to the creator, which is Michael Jackson in this case. The kids and everyone else in poverty are waiting for someone to break them free of their chains so that they can fulfill their dreams and live healthy lives. So they're describing to me the importance of this term poverty, which also needs to be bolded. I'm going to chalk this up to I'm trying to lead by example to show you what you should do as you write your paper. All right. You're going to attack me on my student evaluations this semester. Mr. Wynkoop doesn't proofread. Okay. Haunted. The main word used in Taylor Swift's Haunted describes how she feels. Cluster terms surrounding haunted include come on, don't leave me, thought, figured you out, can't breathe, whenever you're gone, can't go, back away, yada, yada, yada. The cluster terms come on and don't leave me, convey the frustration she feels after being abandoned by a loved one. Figured out, walked away, and everything we had. Tell the listeners that the relationship wasn't short-lived and that Swift believed that she knew him, which devastated her further when he left. So we're getting a sense of what haunted means here, right? Not by a ghost necessarily, but by past relationships, by people leaving, haunted by those memories, right? The terms can't breathe whenever you're gone, can't go back, fragile, possibly more so than the other terms, the severe and unhealthy emotional attachment that she felt to her significant other. So this is really significant, right? Because this line in particular really gets to the heart of what haunted means, that there's this unhealthy emotional attachment here. In the end, it is apparent that the message of the song Haunted is to depict her reliance on others for comfort. So this is the definition of haunted. This is the way that haunted's being used. This is the writer here saying, this is why Taylor Swift is using haunted in this way, how she's using it, and what it means in this context. So traditionally, we think of being haunted as being like a ghost scaring you, following you around your house, doing things. For Taylor Swift, she's not talking specifically about ghost hauntings. She's talking about being haunted by, these emotional attachments and memories that she can't seem to let go of. So it's more metaphorical here. It's not referring to the paranormal aspect of the term as it's traditionally used. And so if you notice, this paragraph really talks more about poverty being used in a traditional way, but expanding the people that are suffering in poverty. So it's not just like a certain type of people, it's a range of people that are suffering from poverty, and poverty is being used in a traditional way. Haunted, on the other hand, is not being used in a very traditional way. It is being used more metaphorically to describe past relationships, right? Which is pretty on par for Taylor Swift, right? To talk about her past relationships. So she's using a very popular term like haunted and like flipping that into, or turning that into a relationship discussion. So that's more or less what I'm looking for here. And then I also want you to really start thinking about, in this final number here, discuss how this relates to the author's worldview, right? So you're trying to identify and define the key terms in this section, but then in the larger analysis section that we'll move into starting next week, what you really want to think about is what does this suggest about this person? So when we did Taylor Swift, when I did Taylor Swift in my previous videos, and I talked about this in my class the other day, if you look at love story versus blank space, for instance, right? You can write an essay on either one of those. But if we were to write an essay on love story, terms like love, prince and princess, Romeo and Juliet, yada, 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 all of these things are being used by a person that seems very naive and innocent about love, right? They don't seem to have a lot of experiences. And then we find out later that, Taylor Swift was 16 when she wrote this. She was living at home, so it's very sort of autobiographical in some sense. But what it also tells us is not just that she's young and innocent, but it also describes the type of love and relationships that she has been really instructed on or informed of or grew up in, right? It explains more about her culture and her understanding of the world, which is, in this case, a traditional American type of relationship, right? Where the man courts the woman, the man asks the woman to marry him after receiving permission from the woman's parents. They get married, and that marriage is based in love, and it's this beautiful thing, and it's meant to be this white knight sweeping a woman off her feet. So it's this very sort of like traditional American ideal of what marriage should be, not necessarily what it is. On the inverse of that, we can see in blank space that Taylor Swift is much older now. She's more experienced. She's had some really bad relationships at this point in her life. This is like 8 years later after Love Story. And in blank space, what we see is not a traditional understanding of love and relationships. It's much more of like a modern young romance type of situation where it's not about getting married or trying to cure someone of their loneliness. It's much more about playing a game, trying to win, trying to rack up as many ex-lovers you can on a list, but making sure that you get out unscathed while the other one leaves heartbroken, right? And so this is not the traditional love and marriage that we get from Love Story. So this is an older Taylor Swift. She's gotten new experiences. She's been out in the world outside of her parents' own understanding and culture. She's developed more of her worldview. And at this point in her life, she seems much more cynical about love, right? Versus the young, innocent, naive girl that we see in Love Story. So ultimately what we're trying to get to is key terms section just defines simply what the key term is by discussing the cluster terms. In the later section, the analysis and synthesis section, what you're trying to do is take those definitions, right? Take those key terms and discuss the larger worldview. What is something that we can ascertain about this person's understanding of the world? Where did they come from? What was their upbringing like? What does it tell us about, their parents, their education, their experiences, yada, yada, yada. So that's what we're working towards. Hopefully that clarifies a few things. If you have any questions, please let me know. I didn't really see any questions in the discussions from the last 2 weeks. So normally I would make videos to address them if I get a lot, or I just answer them individually depending on the types of questions. So if you have questions, please let me know. I like having you ask the questions at the top of your discussion posts. So that way I can see if there's any trends and what people might be confused on, and then I can kind of address them to the class. So I just made this video based on some things that I discussed in my class the other day and some things I noticed in your discussion posts from last week. So other than that, keep up the great work. You all are doing wonderfully in the discussions, and I'm very excited with the engagement here. So keep it up. See you later.